The restaurant went quiet in a strange way that only expensive places could. Not the peaceful quiet of comfort, but the kind filled with judgment and carefully hidden stares. A little girl stood near the entrance, clutching a worn backpack. Her shoes were dusty from a walk, her hair tied in uneven braids that had clearly been done by someone who was trying their best. Across the dining room sat people dressed in designer suits and polished confidence. Crystal glasses clinked softly. Conversations floated like perfume. And then the manager walked over to the girl and asked her to leave. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cause a scene. He simply told her she didn't belong there. Moments later, the door opened again. A tall man stepped inside, his clothes simple, his face tired from a long day of work. He looked around once, spotted the little girl, and calmly walked across the room. When he reached her, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and looked at the manager. His voice stayed steady. "She's with me?" Across the room, one woman suddenly stopped breathing, because the man standing there was the one person she never expected to see again. Before we continue, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Black Voice Stories for more powerful stories like this. Marcus Reed had learned very early in life that dignity was something you sometimes had to carry alone. He grew up on the south side of Chicago, in a neighborhood where broken streetlights and long nights were common. His mother worked double shifts at a hospital laundry room, and his father had disappeared long before Marcus was old enough to ask why. But Marcus had something many people underestimated. He had patience, not the passive kind, not the quiet surrender people often expected from someone with fewer opportunities. Marcus had the patience of someone building something slowly, piece by piece, knowing that every small step mattered. He worked through high school repairing bicycles, then cars. Machines made sense to him in ways people sometimes didn't. If something was broken, you studied it long enough and you could find the problem. Life, however, rarely followed the same rules. By 26, Marcus had married a woman named Alina. She was bright, funny, and fearless in a way she believed the world could still be good. 2 years later, their daughter Lila was born, and for a brief moment, Marcus believed everything was finally falling into place. But life had other plans. Alina passed away when Lila was only 4 years old after a sudden illness that moved faster than doctors could explain. The hospital bills piled up. The quiet apartment felt heavier each night, and Marcus found himself standing alone in a world that had suddenly become far more complicated. Now he was not just a mechanic working long shifts. He was a father trying to fill 2 roles at once. He learned how to braid hair through online videos. He packed school lunches with uneven sandwiches. He attended every parent-teacher meeting, even when he arrived still smelling like motor oil. The neighborhood watched quietly. Some people admired him. Others doubted him. But Lila never doubted her father. To her, Marcus Reed was the strongest person in the world. Meanwhile, several miles away, another life had unfolded in a completely different world. Evelyn Carter was born into a family whose name appeared on skyscrapers, charity foundations, and global investment firms. Her grandfather had built Carter Holdings from a small logistics company into a multinational empire worth billions. Evelyn grew up surrounded by wealth, so immense it often felt invisible to her. Private schools, luxury vacations, dinner tables where conversations revolved around stock markets and political influence. But privilege came with expectations. Evelyn was expected to marry well, behave properly, and eventually help manage the Carter legacy. For most of her life, she followed those expectations. But there had been one moment in her past where she stepped outside that carefully controlled world. One moment she had never forgotten. And the man standing in that restaurant doorway years later was part of it. The restaurant that evening was hosting a charity event organized by the Carter Foundation. Politicians, investors, and media executives filled the room. Evelyn sat near the center table, listening politely as conversations drifted around her. She had recently returned from a year abroad managing several humanitarian projects for the foundation. Those experiences had changed her more than her family realized. She had seen poverty not as statistics, but as people. She had seen children studying under broken roofs, mothers carrying water miles each day, communities surviving through quiet resilience. And since returning, The luxury of these events had begun to feel strangely hollow. But tonight she remained composed, fulfilling her role. Then she noticed something unusual. Near the entrance, the restaurant manager had approached a child, a little girl. The girl stood nervously beside a table near the wall, looking around as if searching for someone. Her backpack looked out of place in a room full of evening gowns. At first, Evelyn thought nothing of it, but then she saw the way the manager's expression tightened. The polite smile disappeared. He spoke to the girl in a tone that was quiet, but unmistakably dismissive. Guests nearby began to notice. Some frowned. Others simply looked away. Evelyn felt a familiar discomfort forming in her chest. The manager gestured toward the door. The girl hesitated, clutching her backpack tighter. And that was when the door opened again. Marcus stepped inside. He had come straight from work, still wearing his dark mechanic jacket. His hands carried the faint marks of grease that never fully washed away. He had rushed after receiving a call from Lila's school, saying she had waited too long for pickup, and decided to walk to the only place she remembered him mentioning earlier that week. Marcus had told her about the fancy restaurant downtown, where he sometimes repaired delivery trucks behind the building. He never imagined she would try to find him there. When he saw her standing near the entrance, his heart dropped, but he walked calmly, because panic would only scare her. When he reached her, he placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "She's with me." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a father protecting his child. The manager looked Marcus up and down. The difference between the guests and the mechanic standing there seemed painfully obvious to him. This event was invitation only. High society, powerful people, and now a working-class black father and his daughter were standing in the middle of it. The manager began explaining that this was a private function. Marcus listened quietly. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply repeated that his daughter had been waiting for him. Across the room, Evelyn watched everything unfold, and slowly, a memory began rising to the surface. Years ago, during her university days, she had volunteered at a community auto workshop as part of a social outreach program. It had been one of the few times she stepped into a world completely different from her own. And there had been a young mechanic there. Quiet, focused, kind. He had fixed a broken engine for free because the single mother who owned the car couldn't afford to repair. That mechanic had been Marcus Reed. They had spoken only a few times. But those conversations had stayed with her because Marcus had treated her not like an heiress or a donor, but simply like another person willing to help. Now, years later, he stood across the restaurant holding his daughter's hand, and Evelyn realized something deeply uncomfortable. The room was judging him. The tension inside the restaurant thickened. Guests had stopped pretending not to watch. The manager, increasingly uncomfortable, continued insisting that Marcus and his daughter would need to leave. Marcus nodded slowly. He understood exactly what was happening. He had lived with these moments his entire life. Moments where assumptions were made before introductions, where appearances spoke louder than truth. He crouched down to Lila's level, adjusting her backpack gently. They would leave. He had no desire to argue. But before he could turn toward the door, a chair moved sharply across the marble floor. Evelyn Carter stood. The sound echoed across the room. Dozens of heads turned. No one interrupted Evelyn Carter at her own foundation's event. She walked calmly across the dining room. Each step felt heavier than the last, because she understood what this moment meant. She understood the silent rules of rooms like this, and she also understood something else. Some rules deserved to be broken. When she reached Marcus and Lila, she stopped beside them. For a moment, Marcus didn't recognize her. Time had changed them both, but Evelyn recognized him instantly. She looked at the manager, then at the watching crowd, and finally back at Marcus. The room held its breath, because the next words would determine everything. Evelyn Carter did something few people in that room expected. She smiled, not the polite smile used in corporate meetings or charity speeches. A genuine smile, one filled with recognition and respect. Then she looked at the manager and calmly gestured toward Marcus and Lila. She explained that Marcus Reed had once helped a struggling community workshop stay open when funding collapsed. She explained that his kindness had allowed dozens of families to keep their only vehicles running. She explained that real character wasn't measured by clothing or invitations. It was measured by what people did when no one important was watching. The room grew quiet in a different way now. Not judgment, reflection. Marcus stood still, unsure how this moment had shifted so quickly. But Evelyn continued. She explained that events like the Carter Foundation Gala were meant to support communities. And communities were made of people like Marcus, people who carried responsibilities quietly, people who showed up for their children every day, people who built strength not through privilege, but through perseverance. She then invited Marcus and Lila to sit at her table. Gasps spread across the room, but no one argued, because Evelyn Carter's voice carried power far beyond that restaurant. Marcus hesitated. Pride and humility wrestled quietly inside him, but Lila squeezed his hand, and slowly they accepted. The evening continued differently after that. Guests who had once looked away now approached with genuine curiosity. Conversations shifted, perspectives softened, and something unexpected happened. A moment of quiet justice unfolded. Not dramatic, not loud, but meaningful. Because sometimes the most powerful change begins with one person refusing to accept a silent injustice. Years later, many people who attended that event would remember the moment clearly. Not the speeches, not the donations, but the moment a father calmly said 4 words that reminded everyone what dignity looked like. She's with me. If this story moved you, make sure to like, share, and comment your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Voice Stories for more powerful, true, inspired stories.